We've started the recording. I'll kick off. All right, everyone, welcome. This is our Regenerative Finance Aligned Voter Committee meeting number 11, I believe, and we're going to have 2 meetings this week. We took a break and did not meet prior 2 weeks. And as a community of aligned MKR holders, on behalf of MakerDAOs and Space Exponential, we've been really working very hard on, how to close out the quarter. So I put at the top of the chat in this voice channel. So I'm sure everyone in here is familiar with this, but in case you might not be, inside every voice channel, there's a little icon at the top right, and you can open up a chat that's specific to our voice calls, and it will have a history of all of the chat that's gone on since we've started these meetings. And so I did link the meeting announcement on the forum where we posted several kind of prompts, questions that we want to kind of get into and hear about from the community over the course of this week. And so appreciate that, we can do these meetings in lots of different ways. And in fact, there's been tons of variety among the different aligned voter committees, everything from, text-only meetings to, full-blown Zoom with video. And we've done a few different things. We've done Zoom, we've done these voice channel meetings, and I'm not sure that we'll go in the direction of the all chat meetings. I think when you all see what we publish at the end of the week, you'll notice how we're starting to think about our more normal course operations, much more kind of directed outward, right? So outward toward the world that we want to bring into this ecosystem, rather than how we've needed to be super internally focused. And, I think that probably will continue to some degree over the next quarter as, a bunch of things are settling down, coming online. So in this meeting, I think we will not need the whole hour. We want to cover 2 things: the governance scope, and to talk a little bit about the position documents. And I actually made some notes, which I never actually do, but I wanted to try to be really efficient and focused in covering the items. And welcome everyone dropping in. And so I want to start first. Let me bear with me. I'm going to go through my notes so I don't miss anything. All right, number 1, I did my welcome. I shared the meeting announcement, and I've just said it's a brief meeting, unless you all get super chatty in the chat, in which case, I'm happy to stay the whole hour and answer questions and just have a chat. I said number 4, and yeah, okay. Well, I want to talk about, give you a little context on position documents first, and then I think the latter part of the meeting will be more so, the specific scope, governance scope discussion. So on our position documents, which you're not going to see until the end of the week, and it's been great to see what's being posted so far this week on what everyone else has been doing. But we've in the last 2 weeks been focusing on understanding the big picture, the end game vision, as much as possible, the vision and the details of the end state. And it's, a theme that, we started these ABC meetings with on it may not have been our first meeting. Our first meeting was really really just getting oriented. But on our second meeting, a lot of you were in that meeting. We started with like a question of what does the world look like when there's an unbiased world reserve currency, or when like cancer's cured or poverty's cured, pretend that had happened, think backwards, like what impact did MakerDAO have on bringing about that result, right? So we've always, as an AVC, been trying to iterate between like the details and the problems that are in front of us today, but where are we trying to go as a community first, as a project MakerDAO first, and then of course our particular perspective as regenerative finance and the impact we want to make both at Maker and in the world. So that was our goal in focusing on this quarter end assignment, to take a step back, try to take a fresh look at everything in front of us. And so this idea of like having a vision of the, quote, the end game state, it's like an asymptote, right? So I put that in the chat as well, at the top of the chat, like a quote to this definition, right? We know that the end game state vision is an aspiration, and it will always be aspirational. I kind of think about it like, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm based in the United States. Like the U.S. Constitution was the set of ideals and principles that were not reflective of reality at the time they were written, and continue to maybe be hotly debated as to whether or not they capture what they should capture and how to interpret them, and if they are actually, as a rule set, causing the outcomes that the framers intended, that all of us in this US of A ecosystem intend or desire by our voluntary or involuntary existence here, right? So I think of the end game experience that we're all a part of right now as in that mode to some degree of, on the one hand, needing to have a clear vision, and that vision needs to be pretty inspiring. And perhaps it's unachievable, but that somehow that doesn't stop us from trying and from, always getting closer, even if we don't ever precisely arrive. So I say that also because I'm aware that, there's tons of critiques out there and naysaying and questions about governance theater and centralization, all of which are incredibly legitimate critiques. And I would just share, from an individual perspective, if I thought I was part of theater, I would not be here. So however one imagines the condition of governance and who's calling the shots and all of that, I certainly believe that the work of the AVCs and the contributions that all of you are doing in your roles as delegates, AVC members, and governance aspects of Maker, that it's far too big of a project today, and it's far too ambitious of a vision for all of this to just be some kind of theater that is by default capable of being ignored in perpetuity, right? So I'm very, very excited about the very real work that we're doing, even though, there may be times and reasons where we are frustrated or we feel unclear as to what the purpose is of our work, whether it's being appreciated, whether it's adequately compensated, whether it's seen, and whether it really can move the needle both for the organization as a whole, right? The whole alignment idea, and also for our own kind of individual reasons for being here, which is also very, very important. So, right. So this endgame state, right, depends on a kind of equilibrium that's maintained. And, I think a lot of what I learned about Maker over the last, almost 2 years of being involved in governance, and certainly for many who have been involved from the beginning and much longer than I, the end game just completely redesigns so many fundamental aspects of how the system can work or should work. And it really is this idea of trustlessness, right? I mean, it's the core. It's the holy grail of all of crypto. It's like what Bitcoin did, right? It's sort of the fundamental principle that you can have an ecosystem or a system where you don't have to. It's trustless. It's trustless in a sense. And I know for most of you, all of this, but just to kind of set the stage, set the table for the reveal of what we've done with our position documents. I'm leading up to that quickly, I promise. You don't have to rely in this sort of trustless world on anyone or any participant or any actor to do anything other than what is totally selfishly in their best interest, right? You don't need them to look out for your best interests. You don't need to worry about corruption or lies or fraud. It's this truth machine because of transparency, because of code, right? These principles we talk about, censorship resistance, anti-fragile, and that's what we're often talking about when we insist that DAI should be permissionless always. That this project and the stablecoin itself is, quote, decentralized. And so with all of that kind of being the baseline of what we want to achieve or what we think does advance humanity, advance finance, whatever you think that this trustlessness leads to, that's, obviously like some kind of net positive in your mind, or you wouldn't be on this call. Then I would argue that the governance scope in terms of the Atlas is actually the most important of all the scopes, because if the design and the incentives of what determines the actual protocol, like what actually really becomes or continues to be the state of the protocol, the code, if that system of design and incentives doesn't work, then the whole system can't hold, right? So like everything that's going on in the stability scope and accessibility scope, all of that, if the alignment, incentives, dynamics of governance are not really expertly done, then we don't get there. So it's great to end the quarter on governance as a scope. And in our position documents, we've really, really zeroed in on really just one issue, one question, or one proposal. And to preface kind of, I think our high level view of where the Atlas is right now is like to say that these things have just only been lightly sketched in, right? They're sort of broad strokes. So a lot is not well defined. A lot, I think, has sort of been just sort of lightly, well thought through, and I think really well designed at a high level, sort of conceptual level. But the specifics and the details, not only are they not there, but they also can't be there. Very early on, before the end game, pregame really officially kicked off, sort of the first couple of months of the year, we talked about how important it was to really refine these elements as we used them, that there's only so much you can kind of design in your head, or any person or any group of people, and spit it out, and it just operates well. And so with that in mind, my view is this has been a tremendous success this quarter. The number of people and the diversity of ideas and the enthusiasm has been, really impressive. And many of you will know that roll back the clock for 6 or 7 months. I don't think anybody had any idea or expectation that we would have, this much kind of uptake. But naturally, it now, I think, will need to take some time to kind of come down to earth. How is it really working? And particularly among governance, which is, why we had the set of prompts for this particular meeting, and in the second half of this call, want to hear very much from the delegates on some of these topics around incentives and the compensation and the rules. So from our view of the Atlas and how all of these balance of powers and interactions and incentives should work, we see that the AVCs, the advisory councils, the ACs, absolutely 100% agree with the bright spotlight and the bullseye and the circle and the highlighter that's been forced around that. Both, I think at the beginning of the quarter, it was verbally, Rune was saying early on, the very first ABC meetings, he kind of attended, and then we, not really interacted or heard from him very much. He's done a lot of podcasts, which I highly recommend people check out as a source of trying to make some sense of what's coming down on the paper, because there isn't a ton of other discussion or elaboration, but some of his interviews have really helped me anyway fill in a lot of gaps. And so, the advisory councils, it's though we're in this terrible chicken and egg problem that we're supposed to we as in AVCs, or really the whole ecosystem, ultimately should be taking input from the advisors, right? The advisors are producing the recommendations, the inputs for the scope improvements. But that we have this sort of bootstrapping language that's really designed to get the people who are in seats today to focus all their energy on getting these councils up and going so that we can have those inputs. But our view was that process of how do we get this process started? We also need advice for that, right? We really need expert advice for even that. So our scope proposal that you'll see is essentially that simple proposal that we empower facilitators, that we are going to sort of propose that facilitators take the initiative to put forward, through whatever process they deem appropriate based on their inside position. The facilitators of all the scopes, which is, Gov Alpha and SES. SES has 4 of the 5 scopes, right? They know what's going on in a way that none of us on this call, at a depth and on a day-to-day granular level. we at Refi feel really, really confident in the teams that are working and the work that they've been doing, and excited about what's happening, even if there's not perfect transparency and communication, because, it's a lot going on. So we'd love to see an advisor selected, or, whatever is appropriate process for putting something to a vote, because I think that ultimately there has to be an on-chain vote for a particular advisor. But Refi ABC would like an advisor for each scope to produce a starting point for us on what our policy should be about advisory councils, right? So that's going to be our entire position paper, which is we just want an imperfect but quick and reasonable path in this next quarter to just get 5 people hired to write a starting point, which, will, in our language, we'll have some references to how we've tracked how this works in the scope articles, like kind of at a technical level, how we've come to this interpretation of how to break this chicken and egg problem. So we're not going to make specific recommendations about how advisory councils should be spun up or any other particular substantive point. We really would like to activate the councils and have the councils do the work, which the system is structured for them to have that role, and for that work to be performed by the people best suited to perform it, and to get paid appropriately for the time and expertise that it takes to give great advice on that. So, just for example, I know that there's been some discussion about, what types of expertise, like procurement specialists or, different types of expertise that's useful for designing a whole RFP process potentially, or what we should have in terms of the advisory councils. Should it be a flavor of something that's more generalized that the entire ecosystem can use for the DAO level objective approach, for example, to provisioning work from the sub DAOs, right? So, there are so many ways we could go in proposing a way forward that Refi sat back and said, you actually don't really want to take our advice on how to do this. We would like advice on how to do this. And so that's what you're going to see from our position. Our scope proposal, just to reiterate, is that we hire an advisor, that the facilitators put forward someone or some process that they can do effectively, quickly, bare bones, minimum viable, legitimate process for someone dedicated to producing a starting point for the ABCs. That hopefully, if there's uptake in that proposal, it would certainly be great to look at a timeline that gives the ABCs, Refi, obviously particular that this is what we're proposing, something by September 1st, right? Something that in the last month of the quarter, we can then put our twist on it. So that's the skinny on what our scope proposal is going to look like. Very brief, and our governance strategy also is not like super fleshed out. We just felt to keep things at a sort of high level status quo for another quarter makes sense, and that at Refi we're continuing to be, I think, again, really focused on what's good for maturing the balance of powers, the incentive alignment, and this whole process so that it's sustainable beyond the ABCs that started, right? The handful of probably unique individuals and groups who were at the table and had the context to jump right in. And so, we'll see over the next quarter with some of the disruptions, which I want to switch to now, or just some of the changes, how does that shake out? Like, now that we're in this next phase where the delegates slots have been changed and fixed in a certain way, and just what those dynamics and incentives, how they will play out. And now that we have a quarter under our belt, how do the ABCs, all of us, feel in the trenches and sustaining that over the next quarter? And then what is, even if something's functional for those of us who are involved today, is it working as a model that's going to sustain itself and that's actually going to scale? That's something that people who don't have our context or don't have our level of weird obsession or nerdiness about whatever, I think we're all very unique who find ourselves on this call. This model of ABCs and ADs has to work at scale. And so we're going to continue to focus, I think, a lot in refi on how the model works, apart from our particular flavor of it. And we'll, maybe, continue to sort of postpone emphasizing the more granular refi focused ambitions, because we really are doing this very much for the health of the whole organization, the whole ecosystem, and for the end game structure to find its feet and really succeed. Okay, so I'm done with that portion of the call, that monologue. Thank you for listening. Some of you have to, but I thank you anyway, because you don't have to. It's all a choice, right? So let me go to the chat. Code Knight says, step 1 should be renaming ABCs and ACs. Say more about that. I don't know if you're someone.
Sure.
Great. Hi.
Yeah. So it's very confusing. People constantly say the wrong names for both of them. You even done it on this call, which is not unusual. Try explaining it to anyone who's not deep in the Maker, and they have no idea. They constantly get them mixed up. So I really think the naming scheme is very confusing and could be improved.
Yeah, that's so true. But then everybody's going to really just double, triple die if we change names. We can't change any more names. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. But nothing should be off the table, right? I mean, I think as we go forward, we've got to prepare to always be ready to take fresh takes. Navigator makes sense as an approach, seems similar to what the Atlas envisions for ABCs in the medium and long term under the endgame framework. Yeah. I mean, it's tempting. I have a lot of opinions. But I just was like, structurally, this is not something that I should dive into, that I, Kianga, should dive into, or that we as an ABC should dive into. I know other ABCs have probably literally exact opposite view. So the question in the meeting prompt was obviously a leading question, should ADs and ABCs be filling the gap? And it's on the one hand, I'll give you my take on that question. On the one hand, I mean, absolutely yes, because there are gaps and we're all here to, make sure things get done. But on the other hand, it's but if we all continually fill gaps, then the proper alignment and the incentives, may be delayed or we may not find the right balances. And so we made a strategic decision in a way to kind of hold back and kind of leave space, or maybe create a vacuum, right? That perhaps in some small way can help align, be a counterbalance. Even though we of course appreciate all of the work and the effort, and we've asked since the beginning of the quarter for comments on our docs, or and that all of that was very loose and undefined. Certainly didn't know we would come to this point at the end of the quarter, throughout the quarter, where and I don't think that any effort, any work anyone's done to draft specific language, or a bunch of the ADs that follow us have given more granular pointed ideas about what refi should push for. And we are reading and appreciating all of that. And I think, having that is extremely valuable. So not to take away from that work being done and its value, even though we're not explicitly putting it into our policy doc or kind of putting it forward at that level at this time, because we want to apply some kind of pressure, a different kind of pressure, right? I mean, certainly one kind of pressure, and I haven't looked at the other proposals in details, but I'm imagining that, and I think I've seen other ABCs have really put out like a very detailed plan that could almost be, perhaps you all know better than I, perhaps could be just like literally dropped into an amendment and like put in the scopes, and then we'd be off and running in terms of having a process for hiring code night, for hiring advisory council members. And certainly we will be completely supportive of that outcome. But we offer another option, which is that we're not proposing anything except that we want someone hired to propose a starting point for us to propose. You guys get me, right? You get the chicken and egg thing? And so is everyone following what I've explained as far as our approach on the scope proposals? Are there any other questions or comments about that before we move on? Okay.
Hey, Kayanga, I have some other feedback and ideas to share. I would love to share with you a DM. Obviously, the forum is best place for discourse, but I just wanted to share with you and get some feedback. Also, would love to contribute more. I did send you a friend request recently on Discord. If you could accept it, so I could DM you, I would greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I am notorious of discouraging DMs. And I think it's great. And in this process, I also really want to encourage transparency, but also the public dialogue will just be great because other people probably have similar questions. And right now we have in my opinion, there's a kind of low volume of discussion and interactions on the public channels. So if there's like a starting point that you feel comfortable with, either describing in Discord or as a reply, and you can @me on on any kind of forum message, I would love to, kind of kick it off that way. And obviously there are times when DMs are useful and appropriate. And I certainly will accept your friend request, but I do request, I'd like to have, the introductions and all of our conversations regarding the ABC in public, if that's suitable.
All right, yeah. No, makes sense. I just thought maybe it's a little bit too trivial, but I also understand the point of the conversation publicly. I think it's much more effective. Definitely, I agree.
Great, thank you. I look forward to that mention. Any other Libertas says facilitators are best qualified to set the initial framework. And yeah, but even I think kind of before that, because they're super busy, right? We're suggesting that they're qualified to kind of just pick someone to hire to actually design the framework. And also, when I saw the publication, which one was it? The update from which ecosystem actor? Who recently spun out of SES and is handling a bunch of the UI and community stuff? What's the name of that new group? Not D. Obviously, it's not DWiz, but come on, you guys and gals. Wouter was a comment. I may have put the post up. Somebody's typing. Powerhouse. Yes. So when I read that post, I was like, wow. A lot. It just was like another reminder of like how much is being built and like kind of being worked on. And sometimes from our seat in certain roles in governance, it feels quiet, or we're not sure like who's working on what. I think when you digest, and I'm still digesting. I feel like I need to read that thread like 4 more times. It's like super obvious to me that like at our ABC level, we could work for 40 hours and like completely miss the mark, because the context and the details of what current ecosystem participants and workforce and people who are, have budgets in this transition from the core unit system. I mean, like they are the ones, that's what I'm saying. Like, they are the ones who can know, like we talked about this earlier in the quarter, along with like the ALM question. Well, what expertise do we not need from the perspective of the people who are doing this work already? Like they're the best ones to sort of tell us what the assignment should be. Before you can hire an advisor, you need to know what it is you want to do, and you need to know what your priorities are. And so again, I just in thinking through this, particularly the last 2 weeks, just felt like continuing to go in circles, and that the way to break the circle is to say, facilitators, you know what you have your hands on, and you know where you need help. And particularly around the initial framework, I know that SES team and Retro in particular did such great work last quarter, last year on the DAO level objective framework. And it may just be that, just as a matter of time, things that they may very well have strong views on still needs support to flesh it out. And maybe this is also where, the delegates can really be involved with that advisor to help also, because I feel that facilitators are also looking at us like, well, what do you guys want, right? Like, what do MKR holders prioritize? So then it's like that Spider-Man. It's like that Spider-Man meme where we're like pointing at each other. Like, well, you know what you're doing and like what makes sense to do. So you tell us. And then they're like, well, but you're the boss. So you tell us, MKR holders, right? So yeah. So with that, and a promise that this could be a shorter call, in the last 20 minutes, I just opened the floor. A bunch of you have given comments on the forum, which is really great. Navigator, True Name, and Bona Publica. So encourage anyone to reply on that thread over the course of this week. But with that, yeah, anyone on this call want to discuss anything, share views, concerns about, I mean, that I'm sure a lot of you read the thread about quarter end reflections, but the changes to the comp. So the fixing, how the design works, and we just had the reduction from 7 to 5, which also, although I haven't checked the language on this, but my memory serves me, and I would welcome anyone who's looked at this recently to please comment. The advise Code Night, you made me more mess up than I otherwise would have. I used to have it really straight, and now I'm getting tongue-tied because you pointed it out. The aligned voter committee members, compensation slots, I believe at one point tracked the delegate slots, like sort of automatically. So I don't think anyone has noticed or shed a tear for the ABC members who just lost 4 slots as well, by the way. So that now there's only, so before there were 14, right, delegate slots, there were the 7 prime and the 7 reserve. Now there's 5 prime, 5 reserve. And it was the same. There were then 14 slots for ABC members who completed like a very kind of complicated, I don't know if it's complicated, but it's nuanced, right? You have to hold there's what the ABC does, and I'm confident, almost entirely 100% confident that Refi ABC as an ABC has checked all the boxes. That we had all the meetings we were supposed to have, and we covered the topics we were supposed to cover in order to the best of our ability as the order changed. And I believe we have checked all those boxes. We signed a message when we changed the meeting dates. But I promise you, I just am not sure that I know on the member level. And I do not envy Patrick and Long for Wisdom. Like, all hail to our amazing Gov Alpha team of going and Catcher. I have to give you a shout out as well, because I have a feeling you're going to catch the pain on some of this. Who exactly is a qualifying ABC member? Yeah, okay. Oh, is it right, Code Night, that there are exactly 10 actual recognized ABC members? So then, from that,
yes,
go ahead.
It's just the 10 with the highest maker. 10 with the highest maker, and whenever you sign that little delegate thing, or whenever you sign the member thing.
But then it actually works. And I wanted to focus more on the delegates' comments. Are there any other ABC members in the call? I don't think so. So I'll just be brief about this, but it is part of the governance scope, which we're supposed to be covering. So checking the box. Each ABC member then is like separately qualifying per scope, right? So then it's a question of, and here's a piece that I literally just popped in my mind, is this idea of being a co-author on the position document. Now, I know a bunch of, I think most, there's 3 ABCs that have more than one member, at least, right? There's growth and composable, definitely off the top of my head, and refi, I know, have more than one member. So then for each of those members, what does it mean to check the box of being a co-author on the paper? They would need to be separately tracked for their attendance or participation in meetings in some way. And so anyway, you all know, the delegates have read the scope. It's quite, it's kind of nuanced how all that works. So yeah, we'll be seeing, won't we? How all these changes from the quarter shake out, and refi specifically. I think it's one of the things we're most focused on, as I mentioned at the top of the call. How is this balance of powers really playing out? How are the incentives, shaping people's actions, and do we like what we're getting? Are people incentivized to do work that's not useful? Are people disincentivized from doing work that would be useful? I appreciated a number of comments on that thread about, how do you train, or how do you train up newer or less experienced reserve delegates? And there's so many things to be inexperienced about in the role. I mean, of course, like Maker itself, just as a product in finance and decentralized finance, is a beast. And then there's the governance, that's a beast. And then there's Endgame, which is entirely new and changing, which is a beast. And then there's all the subject matter expertise that, someone could come in with certain, credentials, as it were. It doesn't necessarily help you for a long time in a role of a delegate. So, is the system well designed? And this may be things that go beyond the actual comp, right? I think the support that delegates are looking for, the dialogue, the mentorship, do we have the right forums for that? Do we have the right resources for that? Should there be a training program? Should people have to pass some kind of literacy test? That's always something that I've thought could be useful. And, my sense is maybe a bunch of these things are in different pipelines. And so, getting just someone hired as an advisory council member, where all they're doing is thinking about this and surfacing what's in pipelines, pulling it all together, right? Could be it is like a gap that would be very useful to fill, while all of us, have a lot on our plates to either do or not do, or new things we'd maybe like to do. I think Composable also was an ABC a lot like ours, thinking about how to engage the outside world with what's going on at Maker. We want to make these weekly meetings not business, not technical governance business meetings, but maybe something else entirely, a community experience, a community building experience. And that you really wouldn't see us discussing scopes and article XYZ PDQ hardly at all in our weekly synchronous time together. Although that will obviously provide the structure for the content that we do discuss. But in our minds, that's where we want to get as an ABC. But we'll be very slow and push in, kind of evolving in that direction, because the foundation is crucial first, right? It's how we're all waiting to actually also see, I think, a lot of more things that the sub-DAO, incubating sub-DAOs, professional actors. I'm waiting. I think it's also appropriate to give the whole project a little more time to unfold what's in its pipeline. The smart burn engine's coming. Wow, that's big, right? I mean, my gosh, turning off the burn was sacrilege, wasn't it? For so many in the community. And I think this is going to be very, very interesting to see. Are we going to have DeFi summer? what was that pump about last week? All of crypto's like wants to feel a little bullish. How's that going to change the dynamics of things over the next quarter? If we found some kind of emotional bottom, there's never a bottom, there's never a crypto, but like, did we find a plateau? Did we find a plateau? Maker did a pump. It lifted its head and then it put its head back down, right? All right. Well, if no one has any other comments about the gov scope or paid, sort of how you think the incentives or the design of the governance core, the alignment conservers, how it's shaping up. Any thoughts on what's going to happen when the smart burn engine starts? What do you all think is the significance of this? Have you worked out where we are in the end game? Can someone tell me? In the end game roadmap, where are we? All right, you guys, pulling teeth. Okay. Well, we can wrap the meeting. Thanks for listening, or just logging in with your avatar and putting me on mute. Whatever you've done, it's fine. We follow our incentives, right? Okay. All right. Well, that's the end of this meeting. Happy to, of course, engage on the forum, in the Discord, and we will do this again on Thursday in 2 days. And then, you'll see our big reveal probably after that meeting. Most certainly by Friday, naturally, because that's the 30th. Save the best for last. Ha ha ha. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day, night, morning, and week.